Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, What's New in Perception. My name is John Fedorakis, and I will act as the moderator for today's webinar. The presenter today is Krista Tweed of the HBM Academy. And before we begin, I have a few quick announcements. We're going to have all the lines muted throughout the webinar. And so if you have any questions throughout the presentation, just make sure you type them into the chat box on the right side of your screen. And we'll leave some time at the end of the presentation to answer some of those questions. We also plan on recording this webinar, so we'll have a link to the presentation available to everyone soon after the webinar is over, and it will be posted on our website as well. So, without further ado, I'll pass the controls over to Krista, and we shall begin. Krista?
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. We're going to talk through today what's new in perception. What I'd like to do is just highlight some of the new features that have been added to perception in the last year and a half. That covers 4 different releases that have happened in that time frame. And all those different release numbers are listed on the screen now. What I've done for each version is list what date your maintenance has to be current through in order to install that version of software. So each perception license has a maintenance expiration date, and as long as your maintenance is current when a new version is released, you're able to install that version and use it. So these are the 4 versions that we're going to cover today. We'll start with version 6.14. One change in this version was that we've changed how upgrades are done. When Perception was first released, you had 2 different softwares that you had to keep on your computer. One was Perception and one was the Gen Series Firmware Upgrader. What we did with this version was combine both of those softwares into the Perception install. This makes it easier for you. You only have to have one software running on your PC. And what it also does is prevent confusion as far as your hardware having the right version of firmware to match up with Perception. So the procedure that happens now is that you install Perception on your PC, and the first time you connect to your hardware, whatever Gen Series mainframe that may be, you're going to get this dialog shown here on the left that says firmware upgrade required. You have a chance to say no, don't upgrade the firmware, I didn't mean to connect, or you can say okay, and Perception will go out, connect to the mainframe, it will update the firmware, and then it will automatically reboot the mainframe. And then you always have your hardware and your software matching up and eliminating problems. Also in version 6.14, we added a pretty extensive list of post-process filters into the formula database. These are part of the standard formula database, which means that everyone with that option on their Perception license and their maintenance current have access to these new features. There are 3 different filter types, Bessel, Butterworth, and Chebyshev, and each of those 3 types has 4 different versions, a low pass, a high pass, a band pass, and a band stop. In each case, you can set the order of the filter and the cutoff frequency, and these filters are all described in detail in the analysis manual for that Perception option. In version 6.14, we also added a remote reboot capability. We have some customers and users whose mainframes are not easily accessible. They're not in a lab environment, they're out in the field, and the mainframe is sometimes buried a long distance away from their control room where Perception is. So it's helpful for them to be able to reboot a mainframe system without having to travel out to the mainframe. In order to avoid the possibility that someone accidentally reboots a mainframe that's taking data or in use, We simply don't allow a system to be rebooted unless there's no perception connected to it. So the way that you do this is you go to the control menu and you select the reboot system option. This dialog on the right pops up. It will display all of the mainframes that are seen on the network for that perception. You select the one or however many you want to reboot and select reboot, and it'll reboot those mainframes. A few other miscellaneous items that were added in version 6.14. There's now a link to the diagnostic data folder in the Windows Start menu. This folder contains the notification and other log files that Perception maintains as a way of monitoring what's going on and catching possible problems. If you're having issues with Perception, our support group might ask you to send these files to them. So putting the link in the Start menu just makes it very simple for that folder to be found. There's also a link within Perception under the Help menu. You can just say Help, Open Diagnostic Data Folder. We also added some new RPC calls to the remote control option in Perception. Those were added at the request of customers who used that feature and wanted some more functionality. We also fully tested compatibility with Office 2010, both 32-bit and 64-bit versions. So those are now fully compatible with Perception. And we updated to using direct 3D drawing for our scrolling display. The reason for that update was to improve the scrolling display and correct some issues that had been found in a few configurations with specific video cards, etc. I mention it here because if you update to Perception 6.14 and you have an older video card, you may need to update your drivers to have that be compatible with Direct 3D. On to Perception 6.16. In this version of software, the release corresponded with a release of a new piece of hardware for the Gen Series family. What you see in the picture are two new modules, a 16-channel module and a 32-channel module. These modules offer two different sample rate options. You can either get a maximum sample rate of 20 kilosamples a second or a maximum sample rate of 250 kilosamples a second. They both support 20 millivolts to 40 volt input ranges, have programmable filters, differential inputs, and 24-bit A to Ds. The higher sample rate version does also support IEPE or ICP type sensors and charge. In version 6.16, we also added an XY display to Perception. This was also at the request of users. The XY display is available in both live and review mode. If you have a time display window open already in Perception, the easiest way to add the XY display is just to click the XY icon in the toolbar. What that does is opens a second display that will be your XY display. We always link the XY display to a time window. So whatever time window is selected, the trace that's active, meaning the trace that has the reverse highlight on the name in the Y annotation area, is used as your Y-axis signal, and all of the other traces in that time display are then plotted versus your X-axis trace. If you right-click in the XY display and select Properties, you will see a Properties window open that looks like this. Just like any other display in Perception, you can set a custom name so that you can make it match whatever data you know is in the window. You can also change what time window it is linked to or the source for the X-axis. And there's options for the grid, number of divisions, and different customized items like that. At the bottom of the XY display, you have control buttons for the display and time information as far as what data is being shown. You can also, if you'll put your mouse over your point of interest and right-click, you have the option to set the cursor at a position. So you can pick a point that's of interest in the XY display and automatically have the cursors go to that point and be able to see the time information, etc. for that point. In version 6.16, we also added an entire set of HIC or head injury criterion functions to the formula database. Those functions are fully described in the analysis manual. And I want to make sure you're aware that whenever you install the perception software, we also automatically install all the latest manuals that are available at the time that software was released. You can find a link to those manuals through the Windows Start menu. Just go All Programs, HBM, Perception, Manuals, and select the English folder, and you'll have a Windows folder open that is all of the perception manuals with the latest information. Finally, in 6.16, we added an IRIG enhancement. If your mainframe has the IRIG option added to the controller, and you have an IRIG source connected, the Gen Series firmware will now add a time marker. If your IRIG signal is lost and the synchronization is lost during a recording, when that synchronization is reestablished, the firmware will add a time marker onto your recording, letting you know synchronization is back and the detected time deviation between the IRIG signal and the mainframe time at the time the synchronization was restored. All right, on to version 6.18. We had a lot of users who really they may record a lot of data because they want to make sure they capture everything that's of interest. But then in the end, they only need to send a small part of that data on to engineering or to their customers or whoever needs to do the analysis. And they really wanted a way to do that still using the PNRF format. As many of you know, the PNRF format is a lot more than just the recorded data. It also includes all of the hardware setup information, all of the display settings, what signals are shown on what page, what formulas have been set up for it to be calculated while it's being recorded, and reports. Everything that's in perception is saved as part of that PNRF file. And if you export that file into NRF format or something else, you lose all of that additional information. So in version 6.18, we added an option in the file menu called Save a Copy As. And this will let you save a portion of your data file back into a PNRF format so that all of that additional information is maintained. So after you select Save a Copy As, this dialog on the right appears. You select the folder where you want the copy saved, and then down at the bottom, you can click this Advanced key. That opens this dialog that lets you determine exactly what data you want to save. You can do the complete recording. You can do only an area between cursors. You can do whatever's displayed on the screen that'll be saved. Or you can do some specific sweeps. So if you're in sweep mode, maybe you only need triggers 1 through 3 and not 1 through 24. You could save a subset of the sweeps. And the bottom lets you set the file name. So if each sweep is going to be saved in a separate file, you could automatically add the trigger number to the file name. You can add the recording date to the file name, etc. And the full path example down here at the bottom shows you where that file will be saved and exactly what its name will look like. In version 6.18, we also made a small change to our bridge wizard. If you use strain gauge type sensors and use the bridge wizard to configure them, in step 2, the second entry used to be called active gauges, and it could only be an integer number, 1, 2, 4. We've changed that terminology to bridge factor, and you can see with both half bridge and full bridge items, you now have fractional entries that are possible. This just allows users to correctly set up more sophisticated and complicated bridge type applications. There were also 2 new functions added to perception for version 6.18, and they are true frequency and true RMS. The frequency and RMS functions that are that were previously in the function formula database and are still there just determine the frequency and the RMS either over the entire file or between 2 time points. But there are some applications where users need to make sure that the RMS is measured over an even number of cycles so they get a very accurate result. So this true frequency and true RMS allows you to measure, to look at specific number of cycles in your data and then display that as a trend waveform. So you'll actually see the frequency result versus time, and that'll show up as an additional signal that you can put into your display. Version 6.20, we're now up to the latest and greatest software. And this, if you haven't discovered this by accident yet, is pretty slick. You can now much more easily configure your display in perception. For previous versions, if you wanted to move traces around, either change panes or put them on a different page in your display, you needed to right-click in the display, choose Properties, and then go to that third tab for Trace Setup, and move around which signal was where. What you can do now is use drag and drop. So I've shown in this picture on the right, if I want to move this sine wave type signal to a different location, I can just click on it with my mouse and drag it. If I drag it right up to the next pane above, it will be added to that pane. If I drop it on the line separating 2 panes, then a new pane will be added, showing that result. You can even switch it to a different page by grabbing onto the name, hover over your page marker here, and a pop-up will come up, and you can drop it onto whatever page you want. And then you can go to that new page and move it around where you want it. This functionality is also seen in the instrument panel software, the touchscreen version of Perception, that was designed specifically for use on our Gen 2i mainframe. In version 6.20, we also added annotation per tick. So in previous versions of Perception, you would see tick marks shown either on the x-axis or the y-axis to show the different divisions of that axis, but there weren't individual labels. We've added the capability now in the Display Setup dialog. You open this dialog just by right-clicking in the display and selecting Display Properties, or clicking on the icon in the toolbar, and you'll see in the second tab an X annotation and a Y annotation that you can show per tick. And of course, the grid section will help you determine how many ticks you have per pane. There's one caveat to this, and that is if your panes are too small, where we simply don't have the room to draw all the numbers onto the display, those won't be shown. So if you've made this selection and you're not seeing anything, try making your pane bigger and then see if it shows up. Version 6.20 also added the ability to save a video file into your PNRF file. There's an option for perception called video playback that allows a user to import a video file in and synchronize the frames of the video with a location in the perception data. Previously, you could link a video file in with an experiment file or PNRF file, but you couldn't actually save it as part of it. Now you can. So what you do is when you're opening the video file, you make sure you select Add Video File into Experiment. You go ahead and do your synchronization, and then once it's all synchronized, you would go to File, Save a Copy As, and you would save out a new PNRF file that would include your video. Version 6.20 also added support for our new interface controller module, which we call the IM2. Every Gen Series mainframe has an interface module that's part of the mainframe and acts as the brains of the mainframe. We've upgraded that interface module to have higher performance and support some new options like onboard storage. And so version 6.20 supports those new capabilities. Older mainframes, if people are interested in learning more, can be upgraded to the new IM2. Everything is fully compatible. You can do that by ordering an IM2 upgrade kit. That upgrade must be done at an HBM service center. But you will have better throughput capability and options like onboard storage are possible, as well as optical Ethernet. In version 6.20, we also added some additional formulas relating to the time of a cursor readout. In perception, the default time display is always relative to the start of the recording. So when you hit start recording, that's time t equals 0, and the time increases up from there. That time is what all of the cursor readout is done. Now, perception also keeps track of the time source, so it knows an absolute date and time for that recording, and there are options for you to display that on the x-axis. But whenever you did cursor readout, it didn't show that absolute time. So these two new formulas, relative time to local and relative time to UTC, give you a way to display that absolute time of the recording as opposed to the relative time. Here's two examples. If you put that formula result in a meter, then you can see what the local time is at the location of the cursor. You could also use that formula result in a trace marker. So if you're interested in marking a specific point of interest and knowing at exactly what time that event happened, you can have that displayed in the trace marker. So what's coming? Perception 6.30 is scheduled to be released in September of this year, and I can give you some teasers, I guess, of what's coming in that version of software. One is we're going to have a sensor database option for perception. This will give you a way to easily manage a large number of sensors and assign a specific sensor to a channel and automatically have that channel configured based on that sensor's properties. We are also going to have a formula wizard. One very consistent request we've had for a long time with perception is a way to do some error checking within the formula database. So the formula wizard is going to be a single dialog tool that makes it easier for users to create formulas and verify that the syntax is all correct before they look at the result. We'll also be adding a complete set of cycle functions to the formula database, and there will also be some automatic time-based groupings. Right now, if you have a mixed configuration system where different modules have different sample rate capabilities, for example, you might have a high-speed module that can support up to 100 megasamples a second, and you might have some other modules that only support 1 megasample a second. In that case, right now, perception can get a little messy as far as using the control panel and setting different sample rates. So what we'll do in Perception 6.30 is Perception will automatically group together modules that have the same sample rates and set up control panels automatically to make it easy to manage those different groups. So a summary. Each new Perception release adds new features to the software in addition to bug fixes, and many of those new features are added to either standard Perception or existing options. So if your maintenance on your Perception license is current, you can install the new software and access all of the new features. We always post the latest version of Perception on our website, along with release notes for that version. So you can see, from what you see on the website, there's a link to the release notes. It's just a PDF file that you can easily download and see what new features have been added and what bugs have been corrected. So that's everything I had. If you guys have questions, please just open up the chat window within WebEx and send those to me, and I can respond to them if you like. Or if you think of questions later and have other requests, you can always email support@usa.hbm.com. There's 3 of us that check that mailbox daily and can help with Perception support and questions. I do have a question of how often new releases are made available each year. That varies, but typically we have 2 to 3 Perception releases a year that will come out, and they're always posted on our website and available. I have another question. If my Perception maintenance expires the day after a new release, and I end up upgrading a week later after the release, can I still upgrade my software? And the answer to that would be no, because the date what Perception looks at is checking the maintenance is your maintenance expiration versus the date the software was released, not the date you're trying to install it. Again, if you have additional questions come up, you guys have my email from the invitation being sent out. You're definitely welcome to email me directly. We appreciate your time today, and we look forward to talking to you in the future. Thank you very much.